Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first session of WebSlab 2020, the work from home edition. So I am Cheryl Ibalia, and I will be today's moderator. So this webinar is an initiative of Baras Pinugay Integrated High School, the senior high school department from the municipality of Baras Rizal, from the Philippines. So this webinar aims to intensify learning among educators despite of the COVID-19 pandemic. So our speakers will be presenting their lecture on the education innovators, turning challenges into opportunities. So they will discuss how educators can turn this COVID-19 pandemic into something productive, which will help both teachers and administrators overcome the demands and challenges of education in this time of global crisis. So at the end of the session, the participants are expected to become resilient and adaptive advocates of sustainable development through education. So just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to type them into the chat box. So I'll bring them up to the lecture at the end of the session. Please use the name you registered in your Zoom to be recognized. Make sure to always mute your audio and be mindful in using your video. To formally start the program, we would like to call Dr. Marvin Se, our principal in Baras Pinugay Integrated High School, to deliver his welcome speech. Dr. Marvin Se will be represented by the officer in charge of the Senior High School Department, Mrs. Benja Ann Luna.
Hello, good morning po to everyone. In behalf of our principal, Dr. Marvin Se, let me read to you his welcome remarks. To our speakers, Dr. Ahmar Mahboob and Ms. Mona Lisa Mamac from the Free Linguistic Conference, FLC Group University of Sydney, Australia, Sir Darren Javier, hardworking program proponent, my co-teachers in Baras Pinugay Integrated High School, fellow members of the academe in the local and international levels, good morning. This global pandemic known as COVID-19 has brought a lot of challenges in different sectors and people from all walks of life. But we, educators, believe that this unprecedented hurdle won't stop our noble mission to provide quality education to our learners. Our active participation from this WebSLAC 2020 Work from Home edition gives credence to our commitment to lifelong learning. As we turn these challenges into opportunities, we bear in mind the reasons why we continue to pursue personal and professional development, our learners and our pupils. I commend Sir Darren and company for spearheading this worthy undertaking. My heartfelt appreciation for living up to our mantra, BPIHS Baras Brightest. Thank you and God bless everyone. Mabuhay.
Thank you very much, Ma'am Benja Ann Luna, for the warm welcome. So before we proceed to the lecture proper, so we would like to acknowledge the presence of our participants across the world. So we have different sets of participants. So we have participants from China, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Australia, Singapore, United States of America, Nepal, Canada, Cambodia, Portugal, Malaysia, Pakistan, India, and of course, from the Philippines. At this juncture, I would like to introduce our guest speakers. Our first speaker earned his PhD at Indiana University, Bloomington in 2003. He is keenly interested in the application of language sciences to developmental issues. His primary research interest is on the examination of policies, practices, and implications of language variations in local and global contexts. In pursuing this goal, he contributes to a range of linguistics and applied linguistics traditions, theories, and methodologies. In 2019, he was named as Australia's Research Field Leader in English Language and Literature in the Australian Research Magazine. Our second speaker is an alumna of Master of Cross-Cultural and Applied Linguistics program at the University of Sydney in Australia. She was awarded the Mac Halliday Medal, an academic recognition given to the most outstanding linguistics students of the cohort. In her master thesis, she created material for training legal experts in recontextualizing Australian legal statutes into a language that is accessible for young persons. Before going to Australia, she taught English language and literature for 4 years among high school students. She worked in different Australian universities and Australian government, offering her expertise in linguistics. She also presented in an international conference in Melbourne, Australia, and conducted workshops and lectures in different countries, such as Philippines, Brazil, Peru, Pakistan, Thailand, Malaysia, and Bangladesh. Without any further ado, let us all welcome Dr. Omar Mahmoud and Miss Mona Lisa Mamac.
Thank you, everybody. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for organizing this session and having us here. It's great to have so many participants early in the morning, and I'm amazed to see the international spread of participants here this morning as well. And hopefully we'll have more engagement on YouTube and Facebook as well. And as I say with these sessions, and same with Mona, even though it's a recorded session, we're happy to take your questions. You can post them on YouTube or send us your questions by email or other social media, and we'll be happy to engage with you further. So sort of starting off right into it, the topic of the day is education innovators. Essentially, that is you guys, right? It is you guys who are the education innovators, because and at this point in time, at this juncture, you're sort of being dropped into the deep end of the ocean, not even just the pool, with all the waves and the hurricanes and the storms happening everywhere, and you're told, hey, create this online teaching. Right, so it's not even like being dropped in the deep end of a swimming pool. It's really being dropped in the deep end of the Pacific with all the hurricanes and the storms there, right? And that's the world we are living in right now, because it's everything is flux, everything is so crazy. We don't know what's going on. We're all stressed. We are all worried. There are things happening around us, around the world, with our loved ones, in our community. So of course, in these contexts, when you're thrown into this deep end with nothing really there, you're sort of stuck, and you say, okay, so what do I do? And you're trying to do what you can do within the context you have, with the resources that you have, with the kind of educational curriculum and syllabus that you have been used to, and your own experiences and training. Right. So, for example, one of the things that happens this is really one of the reasons why I think this is a fantastic opportunity. Right. So one of the things that we know from sort of work in education is this idea of how, actually teachers learn more from their experiences as a student than they learn through a teacher education program. That's because, the experience of having learned and studied in a school for years and years and years, decades of it, often overshadows what you learn consciously in a postgraduate program or an undergraduate program, which is theoretical and not experienced, right? So in that case, what's happening right now, in a sense, most of us at least, not all, most of us are in the same boat where we have never really experienced online education. We have never really been part of it. We don't really know what works, we don't know what doesn't work. We don't know what are good strategies. We don't know what are bad strategies. We don't know anything because we just don't have that experiential base. So in that sense, whatever you guys are doing at this moment is innovative. It's trying to work out within the context where you are and the resources that you have to best able to support your students and your community at this time of a huge crisis. Right, so of course, and we recognize that, and therefore we want to start off by saying the educated innovators are you guys. Now, what we will do in this rest of this session is that I will just do a quick introduction, and then throughout in the next 45 minutes, Mona is going to talk you through some examples and activities that she's been working on and developing and thinking about. And the reason we are going to do it this way is because we don't want to start with abstract theories and issues. Instead, today, what we want to do is sort of talk about examples and what people can do, and look at what sort of projects people have created, and consider if those are such projects that you could adapt in certain ways. And then, of course, as we are looking through all these different projects and these examples, we will also, when I come back after Mona's session, I'll sort of try to pull it all together as well and look at those examples in relation to some of the abstract theoretical sort of work that we are also doing. And I know that some of you here I've met you before at various sessions across Philippines a couple of months ago. So you're sort of aware of some of the theoretical work I'm doing, but I'll come back and tie it all together. So we'll try to build this session from practice, so which is very concrete, and then we will take it abstract later on, and then we'll perhaps come back into practice and think more again in terms of the practical applications. So because as teachers, we really want, that is what we want. And also, just having said what I did in terms of a lack of sort of examples that we have, because we don't have reference points, right? Because we have not experienced a lot of online learning ourselves, we don't have a lot of reference points in terms of what to do or not to do. So hopefully these examples can also provide us with some ways of reacting and responding. I'm not saying that all the examples we are going to show are all excellent and fantastic and can be just done in your context, no. But we want to share them so that you can start thinking around certain dimensions and perhaps critique those those projects as well in order to sort of develop your own ways of doing things. Anyway, so with that short introduction, I'm going to stop and I'm going to actually turn off my mic and camera, and I'll let Mona take on the rest of the session for about, I guess, 45 minutes, and then I'll come back. All right, guys, see you soon.
Okay, yeah, hi everybody. So I wonder if we have participants who do not understand Tagalog. Do I have to speak in straight English? Anybody? Oh, I think all of us can understand Tagalog. Ahmar can understand Tagalog. Can you? Yeah. So anyway, yeah, I'm gonna do this session in Taglish. If we do not have participants who cannot understand Tagalog, but if we do, please let me know. Okay, so I'm gonna share you something that I am developing. So this is a material for teaching language to students. Yeah, so first let's have a mini exercise. Okay, so I'm gonna share the screen to you. Yep. Okay. This one. Okay, so I'm very sorry because this is the only cookbook that we have. So this is a cookbook that we have here in the apartment. We do not have a lot of books. So so inside this cookbook, of course, there are lots of recipes and stuff. So it's called the Complete Australian Barbecue Kettle Cookbook by Ross MacDonald and Margaret Kirkwood. So Ross MacDonald and Margaret Kirkwood are both professional chefs. They're Australian professional chefs. So this is a text inside the cookbook. So now let's talk about this. So you see that it says barbecued pork belly spare ribs. It's a recipe for that. And then there's a picture over here. There's a picture here. Okay. And then the text is here. Okay. But for now, let's talk about the text first. Okay. Wait. Okay. Hey. Hey. Paano lilipat? Okay, mouse. Yun. Oops. Clear all drawings. Okay. Yeah. So let's talk about the text. So here, in the text, so pwede kayong mag-participate lahat. Yeah, pwede kayong mag-participate. So what we're gonna do is we will analyze the text. We will look at the language of this recipe. So in order for us to look at the language of this recipe, iisa-isahin natin sila. Like, ititis natin sila isa-isa. So, first, titignan natin kung ano yung meaning na binubuo ng language, or kung ano yung meaning na sinasaad ng language para maging isa siyang full recipe for pork belly spare ribs. Okay, so yung here, dito sa taas, makikita natin yung, what is this? Can you see it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is this? Anybody?
I think that's the name of the food.
Yep. Okay, so ito yung
The title.
Yes, the title.
The title.
The recipe.
Ang hirap magsulat. May text pala dito. Title. Okay. And then here, what's this? Serve with lid on, serves 2 to 3. Okay. 6 lean. What is this? 6 lean pork belly spare ribs, cut about 2.5 cm wide. And then 1 tablespoon soy sauce, 1 tablespoon cherry, 1 teaspoon honey. Yep. Draw. Okay.
Some
So
participants answer that it is an ingredients or the label.
Yes.
Miss Jessica Borromeo, Miss Borita Amor. No, really.
No, ingredients.
The ingredients. They answer that it is ingredients.
Okay, yes. Thank you. Yep, correct. And here, this is the
procedure.
Yes, procedure. Procedure. Okay. So now let's talk about the language of the ingredients. So the language of the ingredients, we see, it says here, ribs, pork belly spare ribs, okay? And then soy sauce, cherry, honey, garlic, ginger. Okay? They are all nominal groups. You know what nominal groups is? You know the noun groups in traditional linguistics or traditional grammar, noun groups. We say it's noun group. So we call it like nominal groups. They're all nominal groups. But when you look at nominal groups, we can see here it says 1 tablespoon, 1 tablespoon, 1 teaspoon, 2 cloves garlic pressed, 1/4 teaspoon. Okay. And then grated fresh ginger. So we see here that there in the nominal groups, it's composed of number And then tablespoon is the measurement. So how many tablespoons? 1. How many tablespoons? 1. How many cloves? 2. And then what kind of ginger? Grated fresh. What kind of garlic? Pressed garlic. Okay? So we see, so what can we conclude about the language of ingredients? That they are all nominal groups and they all have measurement and they all have and they have sometimes they have like what is the characteristic of the ingredient or the noun, what is the characteristic of the garlic. Okay, so why is it that in ingredients we have that language? Can we say in the ingredients soy sauce, sherry, honey, garlic, ginger? Pwede ba yun? Ganun lang? Soy sauce, sherry, honey, ginger, garlic, yung mga main nouns lang sa ingredients? Pwede ba yun? Pag sa recipe? Anyone? So pag sinulat, kunyari, sinulat natin yung recipe sa ingredients. Pwede ba yung sabihin natin, ingredients, soy sauce, sherry, honey, garlic, ginger? Okay.
Some of the participants answered no. Well,
oh yeah, sorry, because yeah, I cannot see the chat. yeah, no.
Most
yeah.
of them answered no.
Yep. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, just sabihin mo lang sa akin kung ano yung answer kasi hindi ko makita yung chat box. Yeah. No, kasi kailangan natin ng specificity. Kailangan maging specific yung language ng ingredients. Kasi hindi, gaano karaming soy sauce, gaano karaming honey, paano kung isang balding soy sauce yung nilagay nila doon? Or 10 cloves ng garlic. So, what will happen to the food? Then, hindi na siya masarap or hindi na siya magiging okay. Okay, now, let's talk about the language of procedure. Okay. Combine. Okay. Marinate. Remove. Place. Baste. Serve. Okay. So, yung mga clauses, nag-start sila saan? Anong language sila? So, nag-start sila sa, we call it in traditional grammar, verb. Okay? But we can also call it process. So, nag-start sila sa activities. Now, who is the actor of the activity? Sino yung gumagawa? Who is the one combining? Who is the one marinating? Who is the one removing? Who's the one placing?
Hello, Miss Mona.
Yes?
A participant sent a message that if you can do it in straight English because he cannot understand the presentation in Tagalog.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you po.
Yeah. So all the clauses here start with, okay, except this one. But the main clauses here start with processes or verbs. We call them verbs. They are realized by verbs in traditional grammar. So where is the actor? Who is the actor? Who is the one doing it? Who is the one combining? Who is the one marinating?
According to the participants, Miss
Yeah.
Mona, it is the cook or the reader.
Yeah, correct. So it's the cook or the reader. But is the cook presented here in the language of the procedure? Is the one doing it presented in the language of the procedure? Can you see it here? Can you see, is it reflected here?
No, it was not mentioned. Yeah.
Yes, it's not mentioned. Okay, why? Because because we are talking about what we call procedure genre. So procedure genre is a text that makes people do things or do activities. So when you are asking people to do things or activities, then your clauses should be what we call commanding clause. So combine, marinate, remove, place, base, and serve. Okay, and then we also see this. Once or twice in the refrigerator. Well, what are these? Occasionally. What are these? For several hours. Okay, for several hours in the refrigerator. Yeah, what are these?
The participants answered that those are adverbs.
Yes. Yes, these are adverbs. And what are these adverbs for? Why are they in procedure genre? Why do we have to tell them how many hours or in the refrigerator?
One participant answered it's the manner, adverb
Yeah.
of manner.
Yeah, it's the adverb of manner, or it can be like time,
Yeah.
you know, for several hours, or place in the refrigerator, or yeah. So we use adverbs to tell the people, or to tell the people who are doing the procedure how to do it, where you put it, so that we can specify how or where, or how or where you want to do it, or for how many hours you want to do it. Because what will happen if we do not have that adverbs, then the people who are doing it will not be able to do it properly, because they don't know how many hours you have to marinate them in the refrigerator. Maybe, like, you know, if they marinate for only like 1 hour, or maybe like 5 minutes, and then they cook the spare ribs, and then they're gonna say, oh, it's not tasty, it's not good, then this recipe is not correct. Okay, so now what I'm showing you, let's talk about the picture. Okay, let's talk about the picture here. So the picture here, it's not complete anymore. Yeah, so the picture here is the final product. Okay, so this is the final product. Okay, so what can we say about procedure genre in a recipe context? That procedure genre in recipe context has a title, it has ingredients, that has that is very specific, you know, it's measurement specific, and what type of ingredients you have to get. And procedure is also specific, because there are adverbs, and they all start with a process. And how are the processes here? How are they arranged? Can we base them first? Can we base the marinade? Can we base the pork with marinade occasionally first, and then before you combine all the marinade ingredients? So can you do this first?
One participant answered that it was arranged in a sequential manner.
Yes, okay, correct. So it's arranged in sequential manner. It's arranged in chronological order based on real time. So it means that we cannot base first before we combine. We have to combine all the marinade ingredients first, because how are you gonna base if you haven't marinated it? So it has to be, you know, we call it like step by step. It's sequential. So now what we are doing here is, what I'm doing here with you is we are analyzing a text. And then now, next activity, let us write. And anybody who knows how to make spaghetti? Okay, so let us make spaghetti. Okay, how to make spaghetti? Filipino style. You want it Filipino style? Okay. How to make Filipino style spaghetti? Okay. So what's the first what's the next stage after the text, after the title?
The ingredients.
Okay, ingredients. Oh, wait. Ingredients. Okay. Ingredient, first ingredient.
Pasta.
Okay, pasta. How much pasta?
1 kilo.
Okay, 1 kilo. 1 kilogram pasta.
Kilo.
Oh, what else?
Spaghetti sauce.
Spaghetti sauce. How many kilograms or grams?
1 kilo.
1 kilo. Kilogram.
Ian answered another ingredients, hot dog.
Okay, hot dog, yes. Hot dog.
Another one is ground pork or beef.
Ground pork or beef. Yes.
Another, Miss Abigail answered cheese.
Cheese.
Onions.
Okay, onions. Okay.
Garlic.
Garlic.
Oil.
Oil. Okay. So what is missing in our ingredients? What's missing in the language?
The measurement.
Yes. How many hot dogs?
Specific measurement.
Yes. We have to be specific because
Sir
remember.
Rika Inya answered 1/2 kilo of hot dog.
Okay. So it's 500 grams.
500 grams.
Okay. Ground pork.
1 kilogram ground pork.
Wow, 1 kilogram. Cheese.
Cheese. One. What's one?
What's one? 100 grams.
The participants just answered 1 cheese.
1 cheese. 1 block. Okay, 1 block. Let's say 1 block or 1/2 block. 1 block is okay.
150 grams.
I guess. Yeah.
One participant said, leave the measurement to the experts. Ha ha ha.
Leave.
1 box
so
of cheese.
Okay, 250 grams. How about onions?
How about onions?
1/2. One onion, like 1 full onion, and maybe like
1 onion.
5 cloves.
1 cloves of onions. Medium size.
1 medium sized
Onion.
Yeah. Wow. Now you can write a recipe. Okay, oil. How about oil? How many liters? Maybe 200.
1 liters. Oh.
No, that's too much.
2 tablespoons.
2. Yeah, cooking oil. No. Yeah, because what oil is this? Oh, what happened? Okay, yeah. So we see we have ingredients, and now let's go to procedure. Step 1.
Step 1.
Heat
the pan.
Heat the pan. Step 2. put the onion. Put the
Saute
oil.
garlic and
Saute-
onions.
Okay,
Saute garlic and onions.
and etc. etc. Okay. So you see, yep. So what I did here is that we both, I guided you in writing the recipe, in writing the genre. What did I do earlier? So earlier, wait, I need to share this. Share. Okay. So earlier, we talked about the language of recipe. And then I discussed why is it like that? Why does it have that kind of language? And what does it mean? And why is it important in this genre or in this text? And then in the next stage, we wrote a recipe. So I wrote a recipe with you. I didn't just like we analyzed the language and then I told you, okay, you write a recipe in your own. Go home and write a recipe in your own. Or I will give you a deadline. Okay, you have 5 days or you have 2 hours to write a recipe. But I made the recipe with you. I wrote the recipe with you. And then earlier there were a lot of like ingredients that's popping out here, like hot dog, pork and beef, cheese, onion, and then I said what is missing in the language, and then you said it misses measurement, the exact measurement, and what type of onion, it's medium-sized onion, and what part of garlic, it's the clove of garlic. So you are telling me that. Why is it that you can tell me that? It's because we talked about the language of recipe. Because you know that in the language of recipe, you have to be very specific because in the ingredients, you have to put the measurement because it's all in the nominal group. It's all in the noun here. Okay, it's all in the noun. 1 tablespoon soy sauce, 1 tablespoon cherry, 1 teaspoon honey. And then in the procedure, like nobody is like popping out. So I said, okay, number 1, heat. And then you told me, what's the next? And then you told me saute it and blah, 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 etc., etc. And how is it that you can do that? How is it that you can tell me that information? It's because, like what I said, because we discussed the language of recipe. Okay. So now, what am I doing here? Actually, this is a pedagogy. This is what we call, I will share the screen to you. Okay. Yeah, can you see it?
Yes, we can see.
Yeah. So this is what we call the teaching learning cycle. So teaching learning cycle, it's so we have different stages: the deconstruction, joint construction, and independent construction. But before I tell that to you, I have to discuss first what is language. Okay. So language is a meaning-making system. So when we say meaning-making system, is that it's just one way on how humans make meaning. So, like, for example, in biology, we have taxonomies. We have phylum, we have species, we have kingdom. So how are they realized? They're realized through language. And then we make meanings and then we organize that knowledge into language, into a language of taxonomy. And also, when we are speaking or when we are talking to our mom, we use different grammar, we use different language compared to when we are speaking to our partner, or when we are talking to our colleagues, or when we're talking to our friends. There are some topics that you cannot talk to your mom that you can talk to your friends. So you know, like the content changes. If the content changes, then the language changes too. So humans make meaning through language, images, and all the things around them. So, you know, for example, um, if we see like outside, I am here beside our window. So outside it's very gloomy. Um, it's very, it's grayish. It's cold. You know, the cold, the gray, the gray sky gives meaning to me, because and then how do I make inference out of that, that it is winter, because it is winter season here. So that is why the temperature, I make meaning through temperature, I make meaning through the color of the sky, I make meaning through the kind of trees and plants that bloom and don't bloom during the season. So it's not just language that we make meaning. We also make meaning through images and through all the things around us. And language is also it's one realization of knowledge. So one realization, because there are also other realizations of knowledges, you know. Uh, and it's not only English, because language can also be like Filipino, can also be indigenous languages, but they're all realization of knowledge. Like what I told you earlier, in biology, there are taxonomies, and the taxonomies are realized through language. You know, like the species, phylum, you can write them because they're, you know, they have, it's a language. And that is only one realization of knowledge in Western biology. But in indigenous communities, they also have their own language for the species around them, the animals around them, and you know, like their weather system. They have a term for their weather system. They have a term for sunny day, or they have a term for sunny and windy day, you know. Yeah, so that is language, and that is what I mean by language is a realization of knowledge. And when context changes, language too, like what I told you, that when you are talking to your mom, then your grammar changes. When you're talking to your colleague, it becomes maybe more formal if you are not very close friends, or if you are like in when you are applying for a job, then it's different. Your language changes, your tone changes, because the context changes. So these are the very basic premises that we have to teach our students as language teachers, that language is not just like the thing is, in language education, especially in developing countries, is that we are teaching the students grammar rules. And then we realize that after we finish our studies, that these grammar rules do not mean anything, because they do not fit in all contexts. For example, the recipe that I showed you earlier, it says that, subject in English grammar, it has to have like subject first, and then next verb, and then next is object. So SVO, it has an SVO pattern. But why is it in process or procedure genre, it doesn't have a subject? Because the context changes. Because we are not this context is different from the context in which the grammatical rules are formed. And then so now let's talk about the pedagogy Uh, I hope, yeah, please mute your mic. Yeah, okay. So let's talk about the pedagogy that I showed you earlier. So this pedagogy is called the teaching learning cycle. The teaching learning cycle is a pedagogy that is developed in Sydney, um, and it is based on Lev Vygotsky's sociocultural theory. But in Lev Vygotsky's sociocultural theory, it's very, very human-centered. What Ahmar and I discovered is that, so basically, sociocultural theory says that humans learn from their environment and from the society around them by observing and by doing it together. So what Amar and I discovered is that teaching learning cycle also teaching learning cycle or the sociocultural theory also is applicable to other species like dogs or cats or bears, in the wild. So it's not human limited. So the teaching learning cycle has 3 stages. So the first stage is deconstruction. Okay, so deconstruction is the modeling. When we analyzed the language earlier, that stage is deconstruction. So I am deconstructing the language to you. I am modeling it. So this is the model of how you write a recipe, and I got it from a cookbook. And I'm sorry that it's an Australian cookbook. It would be better if it's a Filipino cookbook or an English Filipino recipe or something. So it will be better if it's, if it's in your context. So when you are, so it's deconstruction. And then joint construction is when you do the activity with them. So when we were doing the activity, when we were writing the recipe on how to cook Filipino style spaghetti, I am doing it with you. The teacher is doing it with the student. So that is joint construction. And independent construction is when you let your students do it. You do it themselves. So as you can see here, it's all inside setting context. So setting context, so every stage, it's setting the context. So it means that, for example, when you are teaching students in STEM strands, then all the text that you have to show them should be the one that is linked to their context or to their professional context or to their everyday context. And all of it is all setting the context. It's all like developing the field, developing the content, or developing the language in the expertise that you want them to have. Or if not expertise, in the context that you want them to participate in. So for example, there are kids that have so for example, like if you are teaching in humanities strand or if you are teaching in art strand, then the procedure genre that you have to show them are the procedure that is used in humanities, or the procedure that is used in arts, or how to paint a bear or something like that. Or in science and technology, they have experiments, lab experiments. Then you can show them lab experiments. They have aim, and then materials, and then procedure, and then conclusion, or something like that. And it's all towards the control of skills, knowledge, and language, and the critical orientation to skills, knowledge, and language. So you can see here, it's not only knowledge, because we don't want them to have remote, what they call remote learning. Like they can enumerate all the authors, or they can enumerate all the types of the types of birds, but they don't know how to use it. And always remember that every subject teacher is a language teacher, because how can you do field, or how can you do your profession without language? Like, in chemistry, they have this formula. So that formula is language too. So all the knowledge, especially in Western education, it's mostly realized through language. And the skills is, like, if you want to, a music teacher teaching the kid to play a guitar, then the music teacher will gonna show it first how to play the guitar, and then the music teacher will gonna do it with the student, and then after that, independent construction, the student will do it himself or herself, and the student will gonna show it to everybody. So that is independent construction. The teacher is not yet there already. The teacher is not there already. And yep. So, okay, wait. Do you have any questions? Do you have any question?
One participant asked,
Actually,
from Mr. Ronald Balibiol,
Mm-hmm.
why do we need to teach grammar rules to our students if any of these rules do not fit some context? Is it not a lot better to just teach our learners meaningful delivery of what they want to express whatever their contexts are?
Yeah, you are correct. You are correct. Actually, here in the, wait, why is it not working? Oops, okay. Actually, here in the exercise that we did earlier, okay, here in the exercise that we did earlier, we are not actually teaching them grammar, but we are teaching them the genre of procedure and how you do it. Because the one of the problem also when we are teaching language or when we are teaching writing is that um, we only teach like a little. We only give them like one sentence or like a little sentence, and then um, we do not show how that sentence or how that phrase work in a whole chunk of text. Another is that when we teach our students um, to write something, we tell them very general things. Like we tell them, oh, you have to be clear and concise. It has to be straightforward, or you have to, or in, like narrative writing, you have to be creative. But how can they be creative? How can they be clear? How can it be straightforward? So I taught you how to write a procedure genre. And how do you write a procedure genre? You start it with this. You start it with the process. And in your ingredients, you have to put the exact measurement. And I am showing it here to you. And this is oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay, so I'm showing here. I'm showing it here to you, and that is, I wonder if you can mute your mic. Yeah. Yeah. So here, I didn't tell you that, oh, you have to correct your subject, or you have to correct your predicate or something. But I showed you how is it used in authentic example. And this example actually comes from the book, from a cookbook. So I also have like other examples here. Wait. Yeah, I have other examples here. I will show you. Like here, this is from World Health Organization. So you can see here that it's not only text, it's also pictures. You can give them these examples. And then, yeah. 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 So, or here, this is for college. I got it from UST. Yeah. So you can also give them this authentic example. So you see that these examples that I show you are authentic examples from the profession. So that is what I mean in when we teach them the language. We're not teaching them oh, you have to correct your subject and the verb agreement. But we are teaching them how is it used in different contexts and how the language changes in different contexts. And we're using authentic examples. And then we are teasing everything. We tease it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in every stages, so that they know how to write it or how to deliver it. And then the grammar follows. It just follows. That we don't have to teach them like all subject verb agreement number 1, number 2, number 3, because it just follows. And also the thing about teaching learning cycle is that the teacher should be the one. Oh wait, yes, the teacher should be the one evaluating the students. So these are some premises that we need to consider when we are doing the teaching learning cycle. Okay, so anyway, yeah. So here we see in the deconstruction, the modeling, the teacher is the one doing it. So we call it, in simple terms, I do. And then in joint construction, we do, because we are doing it with the student. And then independent construction is you do, because the student is the one doing it. Another thing that I noticed is that when teachers model it, teachers always model, and then teachers always show. And then after that, some teachers do not do joint construction anymore. They proceed to independent construction. So what happens is that the students fail because the teachers are not doing it with them. So I know that we are doing remote learning, but it still worked, right? It still worked. I was able to teach you to write how to write a recipe or procedure genre in recipe context, even though we are remote. And then independent construction, this is you do. This is the what we call the main assessment. So in teaching learning cycle, it doesn't have to be one full circle. If you feel that in the joint construction they still cannot do it, then you can do deconstruction again. And then you do joint construction again, and then in deconstruction provide them another example, and then joint construction, and then deconstruction, provide them another example, and then you create your own model text again. So basically in the joint construction, you are creating your model text. You are creating your model text with your student. And then in joint construction, we need to evaluate it there. like, like what I told you, there are lots of like things that are popping out there, like hot dog or onions or garlic, and then I told you what is missing here, we have to put something here, and then we corrected it. So we corrected it there, so that the students will they have a model on how the teacher, or how the language works in that, and how the teacher corrects it too. So the student will also have um, an idea how the teacher will correct their work as well when they do independent construction. And the thing about the teaching learning cycle is that the teacher has to know what he or she is doing. Because if the teacher doesn't know the language of what he or she is doing, or the teacher, then the teacher cannot model it. So if the teacher cannot model it, then the students will gonna have not a good model. They will see not a good model, then they will gonna imitate it. So yeah, so the teacher has to prepare, and the teacher has to know what the teacher is doing. So in when we think of the situation right now, um, perhaps what we can do is that, for example, if you are teaching technical vocational students, then you can do procedure genre. There are also other genres. There are like descriptive genre, there are like narratives, there are recounts, different kinds of genre. So let's talk about procedure genre, because this is the this is the genre that I have a lot of examples of. So for example, you're teaching technical vocational students, then you can do recipe, um, in the context of recipe, procedure genre in the context of recipe, or maybe blogs. There are lots of like blogs, recipe blogs. So what you can ask them to do is, of course, you have to deconstruct it, you have to model it, um, you have to do it with them, join construction, and then you can ask, because the students do not learn if they're not doing something. So maybe like you can ask in their final final assessment, you can talk to the technical vocational teacher, or the food professional teacher you have in the school, that you can have like only one assessment. Then you can you can collaborate, and you mark their language in the recipe. Then they can create like a cookbook of like 5 Filipino dishes that they do. And one of it, if you want to make it like more creative, one of the dishes is the dish that they invented during the lockdown, something like that. Or the dish that they want to invent, and they can do it with their mom, with their dads, with their parents. So the parents also collaborate with the learning of the students. And then the recipe book is the final output. And then you mark the recipe book, and then the teacher, the technical vocational teacher, will mark how they do it. They can like make a video of doing it with their parents, maybe like one recipe in that recipe book, like one recipe there. Then they can create a video with their parents. So you see, you are still the one giving the knowledge. You are not we are not, because one of the things that also the parents are worried about is, are they just gonna give us the materials, and then we're the one teaching our students? Then they should give us our salaries. Yeah. So but here you can see that they are collaborating with us. So we are still the one teaching the students. We can like upload the video of the modeling, and um, different types of text in, for example, procedure genre, or narrative, or a recount. And then we can and then we can incorporate if we have like contents that we need to target in our curriculum, like for example figures of speech. You know, we have to target figures of speech, or we have to target parts of speech. Then we can incorporate, those are just little things, but we can incorporate it in each procedure that we are teaching, or each genre that we are teaching. So yeah, so that is what Ahmar and I are talking about when we are talking about like collaborating with the parents. So they are not the one teaching, but it can be their bonding moment. They are not the one teaching, we are still the one teaching, but they are doing activities and fun activities that they can do at home, and it's their project as well. So yeah, so do you have any questions? So these are just the examples that you can do when you feel like you know, these are just examples, and you can recontextualize it based on the students you have, based on the context you have, or the availability of the technology with the students. If you think that you can you cannot discuss it live with the student, if you can discuss it synchronically with the student, perhaps you can upload the video in YouTube, in modeling the text or deconstructing. Or if you are teaching physics, or you are teaching chemistry, then you are doing if you are doing like experiments, then you can model them how to do the experiments. If you are a language teacher, then you model them what the language of the text is, so that they can write it on their own. Or if you are a speech teacher, then you can model them how to speak. Or maybe if your topic is about if your topic is applying applying for a job, then you can model them how to apply or how to answer job interviews or something like that, how to respond to job interviews. And then in joint construction, then you can do synchronous you call it synchronous, right? I'm not very familiar with the terms. Yeah, you can do synchronous teaching. They don't have to speak. They can, if their bandwidth is, if they do not have like huge data, then you can just have a chat on Facebook, and then you do it through Google Docs. You know Google Docs? So they can open it in Google Docs, and then you can have a chat on Facebook. Okay, who will gonna do the first part? Okay, who will Nena do the second part? Or what's next? What's next, John? Or something like that. And then until you create a model text. And then independent construction, you can design it whatever you like. Yeah, so do you have any question about this?
I think we will entertain other questions later due to time constraint.
Oh yeah,
So,
sure. Yeah, so I'm gonna give Ahmar the time or the floor, so he can. Yep. Okay.
Hi everybody. I'm here. I've been listening quietly, secretively. All right. So thank you, Mona. Thanks. That's fantastic, because Mona's gone through in extreme detail about starting with a text and just showing you how the grammar works. Now, I've been noticing the questions, and I know there's a huge resistance to the idea that we don't focus on grammar, or we're not teaching grammar, especially because all of our exams and the testing and assessment is so grammar driven that it's hard for us not to think in that direction. So to make you maybe even a bit more uncomfortable, or perhaps to shock some of you, I'm going to start with saying a couple of things that I often tend not to say in public, but I think it's important for us to sort of just lay them out there, and then see, be happy to engage with the debate on this further. But I'm going to posit and I'm going to argue here that one of the most dangerous and dangerous things that have happened to education, and especially language education and ESL, is Stephen Krashen and second language acquisition studies. And I'm going to argue and claim that their work, second language acquisition work, which has been foundational for work in language studies and language teaching, not just in TESOL, but quite broadly, is fundamentally flawed for a number of reasons. One, if you look at the work by Krashen, you will notice that Krashen often draws on Chomsky. Now, this is going to be a second shocker. Chomsky is probably the single-handed person alive today who has done more damage to language studies and linguistics than anybody else. Now, I know these are big statements, especially when people like Stephen Krashen and Noam Chomsky are so well respected within the disciplines and within the fields. Now, this is why I have a problem. Now, you're all familiar with issues around ethics, right? That when we're doing research, we have to get ethics clearance, we need to get ethics approval here, we need to make sure that work is ethical, we collect the data appropriately, we get to have consent, and we have all of that stuff, right? We know that that's part of it. But have we ever really stopped and said, wait a second, when we start focusing about questions of ethics in relation to a methodology or a project, then what we are also doing at the same time is that we're saying that, I lost my chain. I don't know why I lost my chain. Mona, help me. Sometimes it happens. So, okay, wait a second. Wait, this is what's going on. Wait a second. You need to, can you please give this to me? And also, can you please stop sharing your screen?
Okay.
Because that's, sorry guys. And where was I? I lost track. Yes, it's there. Okay, sorry, I'm back. Yes. So, sorry for that distraction. So when we look at the work so ethics, we focus so much sometimes on methodologies that we sometimes forget to ask the question, is this very fundamental field of study that we are working in ethical? Right? We focus on the questionnaires and the questionnaire designs and the methodologies and the ethics of those. But we don't question the ethics of what we consider to be a discipline in itself. And that's what I am going to say that we need to do. And that's one of my premises or one of my foundation arguments against people like Krashen and Chomsky, because their work is primarily unethical. Why? Because they fail to define language, which is supposed to be the crucial element in their work, right? I mean, if without a clear definition of how they are defining language, and therefore limiting the application and relation of their work or the interpretations of that work to that particular definition of language, and that's it and nothing else, right? So that they have a definition of language and their theoretical work is addressing language from that particular question of how language is defined. Notice they don't do that. Krashen never does that. That instead, if look at how Krashen deals with this sort of work, he uses this metaphor of acquisition, right? Second language acquisition. Now, when you use the word acquisition, you know what it implies. It implies that you're acquiring something that you don't already have. Now, as Mona said in her session, language is a semogenic system. It's not a set of structures. It's not a set of grammatical rules. It's a semogenic system that we develop gradually in our communities, in engagement with the part of the world we are living in, with the people who we grow up or who are around us. That's how language development happens in childhood. And then we have language. What we do is we develop our abilities in language to be able to understand more things, to be able to express more things, to be able to express them in different ways to different people, trying to diversify our ways of engaging with things, right? So notice how when they don't deal with the definition of language, and they sort of create this assumption that language is an entity. Because why? Because we are naming languages, right? It's often people talk about this. Remember this quote from Shakespeare? Some of you might recognize it. I don't remember the exact quote, but it's something around like, call a rose by any other name, does it not smell as sweet, or something like that, right? Now, that whole discussion of what is in a name. Now, a lot is in the name, right? As soon as you name something, it creates a semiotic existence for it. Now, you might see that I have, you might see that there are things behind in my background, right? Now, you might see that there are two types of residential areas. There's a residential area on one side, which is sort of like, looks like flats in the background. And there's another residential area on the other side, which looks like a house. Now, if we call them all residential spaces, they're all residential spaces, they're equal. But as soon as I say there are flats and there are houses, and then I create a distinction between what a flat is and what a house is. A flat is part of a concrete structure where you have a limited space and closed environment that you live in. Whereas a house is made in land, and it's got surrounding land and area around it. So there is more freedom of movement and accessibility to nature, right? And then there's the ownership idea of it being on land versus a flat by being air. And you create all these categories. Now, as soon as you create these categories, you also allow and you permit a hierarchy to emerge. Now, when you create a hierarchy, we create that category where you can have a hierarchy, then you're essentially stratifying the society based on, in this case, houses, right? But in other cases, it could be language. So, for example, when you say language is an entity, and you give language, so if you think language is an entity, then language is a noun, right? It's something that you can name. It's a noun. So if it's a noun, that it's an entity, it's something in some way, even if it's, so what is language? Language is an entity, therefore it can be acquired, right? But can it be? Is language the same sort of an entity as this telephone, for example, or this, this piece of paper, for example, or something else, or a glass, for example? You can't acquire a language because it's not material in that same sense, right? It's an abstract concept. Language is something that is not really an entity. It is really an action, because language only happens in the present moment in time. Anything else is a recording of it, whether the recording is verbal in terms of an oral recording or a video recording, which includes gestures and things, or it could be a written recording in terms of a text. But language only actually occurs only in the present. And that is why I like to distinguish between Boli and language. Boli is only oral. It can never be written, right? It's a word from South Asian languages. It's a pan-South Asian word, Boli. It just means spoken. And what is Boli? It's the spoken. What do you speak? You speak bol, right? Or the words. But bol is actually an action in Urdu or Hindi. So when you say bol, it means speak, right? So therefore, the action of speaking is what is primarily what we think of, we should understand of as language, because it is in the present. The recording of language can be audio or visual, but it's a recording of it, or it's a representation of it in a different form. So for example, if I write down what I'm saying to you, it will be a visual representation of what I have spoken to you, right? So it's using a different sensory system, and it's moving language away from the present into the non-present. And so notice how when people think of language not as an action that you're performing in this time, but as an entity, then you start thinking about language as being something you can define and describe, right? And that's when you get into the trap of grammars. Now, how can you describe something that is not an entity? It's an action. It's an act. And the act can change in time, because acts are always context sensitive. How you will act, what you will do, what you will say, how you will say it, all of those things are based on where you are and what you need to do. So then again, thinking about language. So once you start thinking about language and what do you see language to be, what is language, how do we understand language, then you will very quickly understand why Krashen's work is extremely problematic. Because for the last 30, 40 years, we have generations now of people who have grown up to be taught and educated and trained into thinking of language as an entity. Language acquisition is something where you're acquiring a language, and guess what? They describe the language in structures, in terms of nouns and verbs and subjects. They don't talk about how language actually works as units of meaning making, which is what Mona was doing, right? When she was talking to you about the adverbials. Why do you have adverbial in the recipes? Because if you don't have the adverbials, imagine, I love cooking, right? So many of you know that. Imagine if I'm trying to write a recipe, or I'm trying to follow a recipe, and it doesn't tell me quantities or how much or how long. I'll go crazy. It's like, what am I going to do? Right? So the adverbials, it's not about its structure, it's about the meaning. And when you focus on the meanings, and when you focus on how meanings are construed, then you're not acquiring a new language. You're developing and extending your repertoire of ways in which you understand and engage with the world. Right? And notice we're sort of shifting that because we're focusing on we're trying to define language. So Mona defined language to you in one way, which is that language is a semogenic system. But that's just one of the many ways in which we can define language. Let me just share a screen with you and take you through a few things. So I'll show you first. Let me start here. So, oh, sorry, not this one. Yeah. So this is a paper called World English's Social Disharmonization and Environmental Destruction. Now, I won't go through the whole paper. It's a long paper. But I want to talk about here, one of the things when I say that I criticize Chomsky and Krashen for, therefore I need to start my own work in a sense by defining what language is. So what you see is that I've actually defined language in 4 ways here. Now, these are not exhaustive. These are just ways in which I find them useful within our educational sort of contexts. One, which Mona has already talked about, that language is a semogenic system which operates through sound. Remember, language operates through sound. It's Boli. Once you shift the sounds to written or visual systems, you can have reading, which operates through sight. Or you can also have sign language, which also operates through sight. Or you can have braille, which operates through touch. But language, Boli, is primarily oral, and it is in the here and now. Okay. So we have to make that distinction, because that distinction, when we don't make that distinction between the written forms or the representations of language and the actual speaking or the use of language, then we get into trouble, because we're losing track of the context and the purpose and the meanings. The second is that language is a socio-semiotic inheritance. This is extremely important for us to remember, especially in contexts which are multilingual, multicultural, that languages evolve in context, in place, in location, in geography. I'll come back to this notion of geographic thinking with you guys in a bit, but languages evolve in location. They don't evolve in abstraction. So each language evolves based on, language doesn't exist outside of human, or human language does not exist outside humans. So for human language to exist, we need human communities. So therefore, it is the human communities that produce the human language. So what that means, it is the geographical conditions, the locations, the weather, what they eat, where they are, what animals live there, what plants live there, what all of those things exist for them in the geographic space that they inhabit or where they live, is what will sort of determine the kind of meanings that they will need to make. And these meanings will then be communicated and taught to next generation and the next generation through the teaching learning cycle, which you have seen as being very efficient throughout multiple natural systems. And then also, Mona also sort of talked about this briefly, that language is science, that science is not something that is different from language, which is what often we are taught to think and do. Why? Because language is where the categories are made, as Mona said. Furthermore, what is science? Science, if you don't think about the methodology or the applications, right? So if you don't think of engineering or medicine and the applications of sciences, then what is science? Very fundamentally speaking, science is a way of categorizing things and classifying things, right? How do you classify and categorize things? It's based on what you will classify and categorize. Now, what you will classify and categorize is based on where you are. right? So where you are determines what you classify, how you classify, what you categorize, how you categorize, and what, and needs of your context. So notice in evolution of development of languages, each language responds to the particular needs of the context and the community, right? So notice, why is it that, so each language is in itself a science based on an understanding of that region or the geographical region and the needs of the community that is developing that language. So then why is it that when we think of English as a language of science as opposed to other languages, it isn't because English, other languages are not language of science. The reason that we see English as the global language of science is because its taxonomies are much more global. Why? Again, geographical thinking. Through colonization, the British and the English and the other Europeans went across the whole part of the world, right? They went around the whole globe on this mission, or I don't even know if it's a mission. There's this quest for global conquest or something, right? They went around the world, slaughtering people, killing people, communities, disharmonying, disbalancing, subjugating, and we have never come out of that, right? We're still stressed through that, and through that experience. It's not like we have recovered from it. So we're still in that state where all of that has happened, and of course through that process, because English and the other European languages were exposed to other geographical location with other communities, other ways of doing things. Guess what? The English language expanded. Why? Because it was the language of the colonizers. If let's say X language had been let's just take it an X language, not even name it, because there's never a need to name language. Let's take X language and make those people the world colonizers and globalizers, and the ones who will go around the world. Guess what's going to happen? It's their language that will take over. Why? Because because their language will develop. Why? Because they're going to multiple places. Their language expands. Whereas other languages don't expand in the same way. Why? Because they are not going out on conquest and killing people. They are rather locally situated, and they are based in where they are, and they're geographically limited. That is why indigenous and local languages tend not to have all that sophistication of things that we find in English, right? It's because of the very history of the English language, nothing else. So it's not that there's, in fact, if you look at it further and you go further into the categorization and classification, and I think it's good to do that, you will realize that the very nature in which the Western colonizing, exploitative knowledge structures and sciences in education works is essentially through two main ways of creating categories, just two ways of doing science. And you will notice this across disciplines. Now, I'll introduce this to you and I'll give you a few examples. You can go on and check it further in other disciplines and other areas. So primarily, there are two ways in which people Western or colonial educational organizations and thoughts and philosophies will categorize the world. They will either categorize things based on genealogy, or they will categorize things based on structural and functional variations. That's it. Now think about it this way. That's it. These are the two ways. And in the second part, there are two sub-elements, structural or functional, but they do the same thing pretty much, just in different ways. Imagine this. Now let's look at it in terms of natural sciences. Think biology. When you look at animals, how do you teach animals? You look at them in terms of their genetic relationship. What is this animal related to? What family does it come from, right? So you're looking at genealogical relationships between different species, right? Or you can, for example, look at how different animals have different structures. Right? There are birds which have webs in their feet, and there are birds that have claws, right? So one are called passerines and the other are called non-passerines. Why? Because there is a structural distinction. Or there could be some sorts of functional distinctions, right? So for example, animals and living organisms that fly, and living organisms that live in the water, and living organisms that live on the ground. There you have three categories, right? What are these categories? There is functional categories, and of course then they're tied into structural categories. That's it. Now you move into other disciplines, you come into linguistics, and guess what? You find exactly the same thing. You look at linguistics and you find these language families and all these ideas that X language evolved from Y language, and Y language and Z language are sister languages, and these languages are not related to each other. All these genealogies of languages, and based on what? With no actual evidence, really, right? Because language is fluid, it's dynamic, it's shifting. People have multiple languages all the time. Even if a person thinks they speak one language, they have multiple dialects of varieties of that language. It's not just one. It's never just one. Because why? Because language is not an entity. It is not a noun. It is an act. It is a verb. Therefore, it is never the same. It's never the unified. It doesn't need to be, because act is in the context, right? And once you start connecting these, you start realizing how we have been led astray by these decades of these academics who claim to be experts in things like second language acquisition and linguistics, but fail to define language for us, fail to help us understand how language exists in coexistence with other contexts. Why is it that, notice how strange it is, and people from the indigenous backgrounds or non-Western sort of context, it's often much easier for them to understand. But if you think of indigenous ways of being and our own ancestral ways of being in indigenous sort of context, you will realize right away that indigenous ways of knowledge foundation were not divisive. They did not divide people based on genealogies or structures or functions. They did not divide animals and plants in terms of genealogies, structures, and functions, but rather they looked at the interrelationships between things. They looked at the balancing and the equilibrium and the balancing of the ecosystems and how everything interacted and interrelated, right? So it's not one or the other, but it's all. Right? Now, notice the consequences of this kind of thinking. When you have a divisive thinking where you start labeling languages, you start naming languages, where you start defining language grammars, and you're turning those grammars as things that have to be taught in structural ways with no reference to meaning or function, you're essentially setting up your students to be not able to have what Ruqayya Hazar calls functional literacy. Right? What is functional literacy? Functional literacy is this basic ability to be able to engage and read and write characters and symbols. That's it. Nothing more than that. Right? That's where this education and the kind of work that they're leading us into takes us. This whole idea that reading is good is the idea that you can keep reading and your language will just emerge by itself. Perhaps it will, but guess what? It will be in certain genres that you have been reading. So it's the genres that you've been reading which develop. But as Mona has showed you, use of language in interaction, in education, in life is not one genre. It's multiple genres. It's diverse. It's various. It's varying. Now, to think about these sort of things, it's also good to sometimes just take a pause and say, how would you, if you're defining language in a different way now, it's an act, it's not an entity, then what are some of the implications of this? So, for example, what does that mean in terms of assessment, right? How do you define language proficiency? So if you cannot measure somebody's ability to do language in a structural, grammatical structure that you want them to do, then how do you measure their proficiency? Because you don't have any sort of a rod, right, or a measure. And of course, what measures are used currently? Native speaker models, right? And which again is a hugely problematic thing. But now notice how when we think about oh, every time I look at the chat box, I get disoriented. I should stop looking at the chat box. But if you look at language in terms of a dynamic system, a fluid system, in terms of being a science, it's being a dynamic, constantly shifting, changing, then that also gives us a sense that we need to think about assessment of language or notions of proficiency of language in different ways. So here's something I would offer you. I've written about this before and worked on this a number of years ago. But the idea that instead of thinking of language proficiency in terms of measured in terms of structures or ability to perform in a particular type of language or a particular variety of language, why don't we start testing how proficient people are in able to negotiate their language and language variation across different contexts and across different people? Now, really, this is interesting because as soon as you do this, you will find some really interesting results. One, for example, you might realize that, so-called native speakers might actually come out to be very low in their language proficiency. And so-called non-native speakers like many of you and me might come out as way higher, much more proficient than those monolingual speakers of English. Why? Because guess what? By the nature of our engaging, using language across different contexts with different people in different dialects, in different varieties, negotiating all these differences, get what? This negotiation of meanings and forms and everything engaged has given us the ability to negotiate a whole lot of contexts. We can manage to understand and find our ways, regardless of grammatical accuracy and things. We can get things done with language. Guess what? A mother tongue speaker, a monolingual speaker of English, who say, let's say, is from, I'm just going to put a place up, let's say, Eastern North Carolina, a place where I taught before I came to Australia, who is a mother tongue speaker from there, who lives there, who's grown up there, who's never traveled much, doesn't really interact with anybody else because it's rural, North Carolina, not a lot of international people, only engages with sort of the local varieties of Englishes. Guess what? If this person has to come across all the variations of Englishes that are represented just here in this chat, in this particular session, you guess what? They may not be able to. They may not be able to communicate efficiently and effectively with many of you. Why? Because even though they are so-called native speakers of the language, their proficiency is extremely low when it comes to negotiation of forms and meanings in different contexts. Right? So notice when you change the definitions of language, when you change the definitions of understanding of language, then all of a sudden you start realizing that by shifting that, you start changing everything else. You change assessment practices, you change ways of thinking of proficiency, you change the ways in which you engage with people. Why? Because you're now moving out of the trap, right? A further trap here. Now, this is where what I mean by what's in the name, because by giving names to things, you make people think about certain things in certain ways. And those categories, if they are not indigenous to us, if they're not observable to us within our local contexts, guess what? We have no choice but to believe them and trust them. Now, this is where authority sort of comes in, and institutions of privilege, and institutions of reputation, and institutions of high ratings come in, because knowledge produced stuff happening in those institutions tend to then get rated higher, and everything else is stratified. See, the stratification. Naming creates stratification. You name languages, guess what? Through language, we create stratifications. You name religions, guess what? You will have a stratification through religions. That is part of how humans use categories, because we use categories to evaluate and differentiate, right? So once you create a category, it has implications. And notice, if you look at indigenous languages, I can pretty much tell you, none of the indigenous languages around the regions that we grew up in would have terms for concepts like a category. We wouldn't have a category called language. We wouldn't have a category called religion. We wouldn't have a category called family. We wouldn't have a category called, race. We wouldn't have those categories. Why? Because those categories evolved through the process of colonization. Because without it, you never needed those categories. Why did you not need them? Because think again, geographically, you wouldn't need it. You only live in a particular place where you know everything. Why do you need a category when you know everything already? Right? So that's the sort of thing. But of course, when the Europeans came, they brought this category. And because we don't have that concept, we adopted their categories. And that adaptation of categories into our own languages fragmented our communities and languages and our people, because those categories did not reflect our existence and our socio-semiotic beings. And by disaligning these relationships between the local language, local ways of being, local sciences, and this pressure of an outside context and outside categorization, which came with money and privilege and power and guns, right? It's an existential sort of a crisis for people who don't want to agree, right? If you don't agree, guess what? You will be killed. So in many ways, all of us alive from the colonized, exploited countries today, in many ways, we are either the children of people who backed off because they were afraid of being killed, or they never participated in any of this because they said, hey, we don't want to get engaged with it. But essentially, anybody who tried to confront the colonizers at the time of colonization and even today is essentially taken away and disappears, right? So any resistance to that, that colonization was so strongly suppressed, then we have never really had within our academic and educational context a way to rethink knowledge from your point of view, or from your basis, from where you are, right? And that's so that's why, going back to what Mona was doing, so Mona was trying to explain to you how language works, how we need to think about it functionally in terms of what it does, the meanings it makes in terms of context, and then talking about the pedagogy, the teaching learning cycle, demonstrating, modeling, explaining multiple times as much as needed, and of course building activities within it. But as we do this, we can always go back now and into a loop where we can always go back and into another teaching learning cycle at any point in time. And I think this is very important to remember, that the teaching learning cycle is not a single thing that you do for your whole course, but rather it's an option that you have at any point in time. So wherever you think you need it, your students are not getting something, or they may not be familiar with something, or there is a difference, a differentiation in the amount of knowledge or expertise in your students, then guess what you do is stop there and go into the deconstruction and the joint construction, because that enables the students to come back and participate and have that independence. So the teaching learning cycle is something that is constantly embedded. Now, the other things that I want to sort of say in relation to this, and I probably talk more longer than I wanted to do, and probably have less time to show you examples, but I'll show you the examples. And in fact, the examples are out on YouTube, and you guys can explore them yourselves. But so I'll briefly show you some other places you can go and look for some examples of the kind of things that Mona was doing, but also more importantly, thinking about it in relation to COVID. And as Mona was saying, that today's world, it's not just simply about literacy, but we have to think about where the students are, where they're placed, who they are with, and all those other aspects as well. And that also that understanding that knowledge is not fragmented, language is not separated from subject matters. It's not like that science and history are two different things. They're actually both interrelated. Realizing that there is no reason to categorize things simply based on genealogy or structure and function. We can also look at interrelationships. And by focusing on interrelationships, we can actually realize that we can actually re-establish harmonies and re-establish balances in our local ecosystems that have been tarnished and brutalized. Because that's the first thing in a sense, we need to do, because without that sort of a baseline comfort zone within our own home sort of places, we can't go into the second and third levels of knowledge creation, which is more abstracted, right? Because right now, our practices, our knowledge creation, our educational practices need to be in the here and now. Why here and now? Because it's the present that we are living in, and we can see out there that the present does not look very, very, very positive. It in fact looks really bleak. We know that the future out there that we're seeing, and the world that we are seeing, the world that we are living in today, right now, is full of divisions, exploitation, genocide, killing and the extinction of new species of lives, trees, plants, marine life, birds, you name it, we are killing everything. Destroying natural resources. There's a huge plundering of what we are seeing. And notice how that is all allowed and permitted, because knowledge is fragmented into specialized and much further specialized and further specialized components, where you keep dividing things and splitting things and naming them. Of course, by doing that, you're able to create new things. Absolutely, there's no question about it. But at the same time, you're losing your relationship and your alignment with the other systems that are around you. You're losing your correlation and your equilibrium with your ecosystems. And once you break that balance between yourself and the ecosystem, then we are essentially, humans become into a free fall, because we have no anchoring points anymore. And so essentially what happens is we move away from the present in the world we live in. We stop acting and we start living in discursive worlds. So that's why we live in worlds where we're talking about texts, we are looking at theories, we are looking at X theory, Y theory, Z theory, and then we are looking at interpretations of those theories. And then we are reading the interpretations of those people who have interpreted other interpretations. And notice, we're getting into this set of where a lot of this knowledge is just based on people saying things, on other people's responding and reacting, and all of this, right? This is what you see in a typical literature review, where you have, identify a gap. What is identifying a gap? Identifying a gap is in the literature. How can I or anybody else or you know the whole literature about something? We can't. So guess what we do? We are all guilty of this to a certain degree. We're all guilty of it to a certain degree when when I'm sorry, Christine, can you please turn off your mic? Christine, sorry, can you please? Thank you. So when you look at these situations, you realize that we need an educational system, an approach through which we can actually reharmonize our communities, our places. Notice so many of us know so much about the world in different parts of the world. Like, I was in grade 7 maybe, and I already memorized and knew daffodils. And guess what? I never saw a real daffodil until I was 26. So even though I'd learned a poem called Daffodils when I was 10 or 12, I never saw one until I was 26. And many people who grow up in Pakistan never see a daffodil all their lives. And yet it's one of their poems that they love. Now, notice how that disconnect happens when we don't even know the things that are around us and we know everything about other places. All those things have to come back. What does that mean? We need to tie in our pedagogy with action. And action has to happen in this place, in this time, right? To create activities. And this is also very important for a COVID sort of a setting where the students are at home. Create activities which are interdisciplinary, which engage people in action, which includes multiple sensory systems, which are not only dependent on language or literacy, which are related on a lot of other forms of knowledge and histories and understandings that are local. Right? And turning those into activities, into things where people can do things and create things. Now, with that thought in mind, let me just show you some examples. Right? So again, I'll take you to a screen share, and this time I'll take you to a YouTube channel. This is my channel called Sydney Linguists, and here I've included, like, I think 12 projects from my students this semester. Most of these student projects are classroom based, or they're designed for class. They're actually projects that classroom teachers implemented and carried out and then reported on. So notice all these projects. So essentially also what I'm showing you and demonstrating here is that I don't teach literacy to my students. I don't teach them definitions. I don't teach them, you need to know this definition and this definition and this definition. You need to know this theory and that theory and that theory. Instead, I say, forget about all of these things. Let's say, here's a community problem that you need to work with. For example, in this case, wash hands in kindergarten, right? So this particular project, so this is in China. So the students actually created this project and collaborated with teachers in China in a kindergarten. And the teachers and the students worked with them. They developed material. They looked at how to understand this globally. Then they created resources. They created things for the students. They created practices for teachers. And then they, took the students out. Here, I'll show you a little bit where. Yeah. And notice, you see here in the handshake washing. So the teacher is showing them how to wash hands. Guess what is happening? All right, sorry. So yes, you can see, and there are tons of these examples where you will see how the teachers and the students create activities that are in class, and they're engaging all various senses. And notice, in even the short clip that we saw, the teacher and the students were jointly constructing hand washing. It isn't just that you show them how to hand wash. You wash hands, show them how you do it in your own hands. You ask them to do it. You hold their hands and help them do it, right? So all that things that we've been talking about, deconstruction, joint construction, independent construction, it comes in together, but not with the privileging of language or particular dialects of language, but with an expansion of it in terms of all semiotic resources, all sensory systems, and thinking about it holistically in relation to who are the students, where are they, what are their needs, what do they need to do, because everything will that understanding will change everything you will do with your students, right? So if you want to replicate this project in Philippines or Pakistan or Bangladesh, you can't do it the same way. You will have to adapt it, but you can, right? Because you get these ideas and you get these examples. Here's another one, bins for the future. Now in this again, I won't show you the whole thing. Essentially what the students are doing, are they creating a contest between students in the high school, and they are and the students in the high school will have to develop they will have to design bins, waste bins that are made out of recyclable material. So the students have to make bins out of recycled material, and that's the competition. Now they can do it collaboratively and everything. And guess what? My students and I've been talking about it, and what they're doing is they're creating resource packages for teachers, right? So if you are in grade 7 and 8, this is how you might teach it, and this is the focus. You will focus on what is recycling. If you are in grade 9 and 10, you might focus on climate change. So notice that there's a shift in it, but it is, and within each of these elements, there's a teaching learning cycle. So when you're teaching the text, you include the teaching learning cycle, you include teaching, writing summaries, you do all of those things, but you're moving these students along towards a competition where they will then build the bins. And guess what? Through this project, of course, they're doing something, but they're still engaged in literacy, right? They're still engaged in literacy. They're still doing things. They're still learning things. They're still participating. All of that is happening. Oh, I just realized I didn't even show you the screen, but here it is. So this one here that I was showing you. So these are the different resource packages that the teachers have, so that you create these information, you create the material, and you do this. Now, guess what's happening? Now, instead, we're still having literacy. We still will meet the goals of literacy, but we're not focusing on literacy. It isn't like we're telling the students, oh, your exam is going to be based on this test, and then this test is going to be these things, and this is so specific. Now, we're changing some of that. And I understand that depending on the context where you are, you may or may not be able to be allowed to create sorts of variations. This particular project, I think, is happening and I think in Chile, and in this context, what I'm saying, in Brazil, this context is happening in Brazil. So in the context of Brazil, and where this teacher, what am I saying? This one is Chile, and Brazil is the one that I was talking about. So what you will find is that the students are working in the context of where they are. The teachers are collaborating with other teachers in the context where they are. Notice they're also going to be multilingual. There's Portuguese, there's Spanish, there's English. There's multiple dialects of Portuguese and Spanish, and in fact, that's some of the stuff that I highlight to the people I work with. And so, for example, giving them feedback on the kind of work that they need to do is thinking, for example, expanding things, including different dialects of languages, Portuguese, Spanish, English, other things, looking around and expanding all these experts. Also, especially integrating, notice, the teaching. So even though the whole project is based on teaching learning cycle, within step 2 here, there's a teaching learning cycle further, right? Whenever you need it, you go in and you do it, right? So the teaching learning cycle keeps coming back into it. So I'm going to stop sharing here, and I know I've taken a bit of time here to go through these things, but I hope that through this session, through Mona's detailed exemplification and going through the example in a lot of detail, and going through the grammatical analysis as well as the pedagogical approaches, and then in my sort of session, taking that up into larger questions of discussions of grammar and pedagogy and language and proficiency, and then bringing it back into practice, right? Seeing how, even though what we're doing, yes, there are elements of abstractions and theoretical thinking, but it is based on experience and observations and practice, and that's the key thing. It's not like theory is something and practice is something. No, in fact, they are integrated. And that's the beauty of dynamicity, because you don't have to do it in one way. There is no one right way of doing it. And we none of us are going to do it well every time we do it, because of course, as human beings, as people, as this life, we do certain things well, and sometimes we do the same thing well, and sometimes we do the same thing not well. All these things vary and change, and that's fine. That's part of the process. But notice what's happening when you're doing all of those things. It means you're acting, and you can only act in the present. And this is really important to remember. You cannot act in the past, you cannot act in the future. You can only act in the present. So if your pedagogy becomes a pedagogy of action instead of a pedagogy that is purely dependent on literacy, then you are going to bring the students into the real world, into the physical environment, into the context, and give them ability to do things, and then use literacy as a resource. And once you have done that, I think really you've succeeded, and you've really innovated your own educational context, not just in terms of responding to the immediate needs that we experience today, but really innovating the whole educational experience itself. Because with the change that's happening today, there is really no reason why we need to stick to any of the old traditions that we were bogged down with, simply because they came to us through inheritance of colonial legacies. Right? At this point in time, we have a chance to break away from them, and create alternatives. And as I was showing you with the example of the recycling bins, it's set up as a competition, so it doesn't substitute the school curriculum in a sense. It supplements it. So it's not adding more work to the teachers. It takes away some of the other work teachers are doing and replaces it with a more engaged action-based activity, which, notice, in a case like recycling bins, it's interdisciplinary. You've got maths, you've got science, you've got environmental studies, you've got language studies, you've got everything, culture, ethics, anything you want. It's right there in that project. So think about projects in that sort of ways, and do and create these things. And again, as I said in the beginning, and I'm going to repeat it again, Mona and I are more than happy to engage with you. If you have ideas, if you have questions, send us an email. We'll sometimes it's easier to reply by email, but sometimes we will just prefer to maybe even set up a one-to-one chat, a short chat, and go over certain things. But please do feel free to engage with us. I know that we are all going through hard times. It's not just you guys, it's all of us. And some of us are going through harder times than others, especially people who live in the exploited communities. I know that your lives are really difficult and very challenging. And and I know that you do the best that you can do within the context of what you're doing. But I hope one of the things that I've tried to show to you today, that don't trust things that are written by experts simply because they are written by experts. Simply because they come from a position of authority doesn't mean they're right, they're good, or they're even correct. We have no way of knowing it. And if we acknowledge authority as being the source of knowledge, and we use authority as a way of saying what is correct and not correct, then we are creating hierarchies and boundaries where we don't need them. Instead of relying on theories and literacy and on these terminologies that come from with these prepackaged stuff that comes from international publications and top elite some of them, not all, of course, people, focus on geographical thinking. Think about where you are, what you want to do. And I did say that we'll talk about geographical thinking. I don't have time to do that as much, but I want to share a resource that I find quite useful in relation to geographical thinking. This is a website called The Concepts of Geographical Thinking. I'll share the link to the chat as well. And just go through this yourself. It's a very interactive things. It will actually help you understand what geographical thinking is. And then from there, it will also give you ideas of how you can integrate this into a multidisciplinary sort of a context in which way you work with your students and colleagues. So you can use that and draw on that. I will just send the link here in the chat here. Okay. And then I'm going to stop. I know I've been talking a lot. I'm happy to take questions, and but I'm also conscious that we are running out of time. So,
thank you, Dr. Mahboob, and Ms. Mona as well. We will go through now. We will now go through to the questions. Okay, one of the participants asked, uh, can they make it possible when it comes into a process? Can they make possible when it comes into a process being emphasized? How can the students apply this context, whether at home or virtual?
I'm not sure if I follow the question actually.
Yeah, me too. What does it mean context?
And what does it mean? Yeah, I don't, so I'm sorry, I don't totally understand the question.
So let us read another question. When I text my when I teach my students a genre text, for example, recount text, then I also emphasize the grammar rules for recount text. Is it okay, or I just directly teach the context or recount text?
No, actually, you teach both, and you don't teach grammar rules, but you teach how grammar works in the context. So why is the grammar like that? For example, the recipe that I taught you earlier, the procedure genre that I taught you. Um, like if procedure genre is used in sciences, like in laboratories, it will not have ingredients, but it will still have the specific like the adverbs, or it will still have the measurement, or it will still have like what specific beaker they have to use. So all of it is reflected in grammar. So we are not teaching them the grammar as like grammar is like a small chunk of it. Okay, I'm gonna teach you this one, and then I'm gonna teach you a small chunk of it. That we have to show it how does it work in the context. For example, yeah, in the recipe book, how procedure genre is used, how grammar is working in recipe book or recipe context of a procedure genre. Yeah. So you teach it like you teach it integratedly, and you show them how it works. Like this is the whole text. We're not just showing them like one line and then correct the grammar of this one line. How will you correct the grammar of this one line? How is it connected to the sentence before? Or how is it connected to the phrase before? How is it connected to the whole genre? Yeah, so that's how we should look at grammar in teaching grammar. What is the grammar doing in the context?
Thank you, Ms. Mona. So there's another question from Mr. Ramir Jubay. How can we employ the teaching learning cycle effectively using modular approach? Because modular approach, that is one of the modes that we are going to use today.
What is modular approach? How do you do it?
We let our students learn through modules.
What do you mean by modules? Do you mean modules are like a 2-week period of time for a particular topic or something like that, or a
It is
module
a
like a?
printed material, so for a certain topic. So there's a pre-assessment, activities, and then post-assessment.
Okay. So
So
that is actually that is easy, because what we should do for the module, it's just an enhancement of the teaching learning cycle. So for example, if we are deconstructing or modeling the text, then we can um, we can record the video of us modeling the text and analyzing the text, and then upload it on YouTube, and then share the YouTube video to your students. And then each YouTube video may be like one text, and then that is your modeling. And then the module, it can be like an enhancement. For example, you taught procedure genre in laboratory experiment, and then you uploaded it, and then in their homework, maybe they can their exercise is annotate the like the parts of procedure genre in this example, and then that is in the module. So the module is only an enhancement, like enhancement activities. But the major activities or the major content you will deliver, you can upload it on YouTube.
and then you can share the link to them. And then like we can, like you can do it like every week. You have, you can release a set of videos for modeling, and then maybe like 1 day or 2 days you can have your joint construction, like all of you will gonna talk in a group chat, in a group chat on Facebook, because maybe, most of them have Facebook accounts, and then you can add all of them on Facebook, and then you can use Google Docs, Google Docs, Google Documents, and then you can write your model text in the Google Documents, and then you can share them the link. So, you can use creatively all the technologies that is available.
Yeah, let me just expand what Mona is saying showing you showing you an example. Now, I sort of rushed through it because I was conscious of time, because I showed you this thing, right? Here's a project that Susana Ribeiro is developing in Brazil. That's why I was getting confused between Brazil and Chile. So this is where she's developing a project on fake news and WhatsApp in Brazil, how to spot fake info. Now, in the place where Susanna is teaching, they also have things like a similar thing to a module concept. I don't know if it's exactly the same or not, because I haven't seen them, but it's a similar idea where essentially their provinces send them these topics with material for every 2 weeks. So every 2 week cycle there is a module and there is material, and of course, because there's COVID, there's no real classroom, so there's a lot of things that they have to do. So essentially this topic, so that her school and her province gave her the topic for this week and the next week to be social media. Now, social media, notice, is a bigger topic, right? But within social media, there is the element of fake news. And so what she is doing, and some of the other people I'm working are doing, is getting students to create material about how to identify fake news. Now, notice, teachers are not telling the students, this is fake news and this is not fake news. This is how you identify it. This is how you don't, do it. No, it's not the teacher that is doing it. It is the students that will create the resources. Now, it's set up as this is embedded within the module, right? So it will use a lot of the resources the government is giving you, as the readings requirements and things, but then it is integrating additional things, and most specifically, it has a goal, which is action. So what it's doing is taking the material that the government is sending you. You're still using it because that's part of your curriculum requirements, right? But what you're doing is you're shifting the goal away from just literacy into an action where the students have to create something at the end of the module. Now, by changing that goal from being literacy to action, you still maintain all the literacy, but because of the change of the goal, you change the dynamics of the whole project. And you also will realize, if you start doing this again and again and again, you will start realizing that your student motivation changes. They are no longer as demotivated as they are with textbooks or literacy-based knowledge and teaching. They're more interested in activities and engagement, because that's how kids are. They want to be engaged and do things. So keeping that in mind. And then, so essentially what she does is integrating your modules that you have with the kind of teaching learning cycle and the activity based oriented approach that we are sort of talking about, the credible approach that we keep talking about, integrating them into it, right? So you can see how, for example, the teacher is expanding. Of course, there's the introduction, and notice in your teaching, especially if you do activity based teaching, I highly recommend that you share your goals, your desires, your outline, your approach, and ask them for suggestions and recommendations, right? Because you want the students to know what the action will lead to. So, and that sharing and that engagement with your students on the action, the focus of the action and what they have to do and why they're doing it. Why do we want to create this material? Because, there's a lot of fake news out in the Philippines at the moment, and people can be deceived. My family members, my friends, anybody can be deceived. So, let's work together so that we will learn how to create material so that other people don't fall for this trap. Now, all of a sudden, notice, because you moved the activity from away from abstraction and literacy into a here and now present context issue, and saying that let's do something about this. That's what gets people going. And notice all that literacy about what is fake news, how do you identify it, all that literature, all those readings, they're still here. And they still come into the summary writing and reading and identifying and reading and looking at further examples and mentoring students. All of that sort of comes in together into it. So by doing that, you reintegrate, you reintegrate things that have been split up in our colonized educational systems by reintegrating them through an activity, making students engaged in activity, and using the teaching learning cycle in the background. Anytime you need it, go into it. It just works. And as Mona was saying, if you look at the animal world, you will see it. You will see how young, like a dog or a cat or a bear or any animal or a bird, how do they teach their young ones? And when you start noticing that, you will start realizing that humans learn pretty much the same way. We are not that much evolved really, and that too much dependency on language and literacy is actually is not necessarily a good thing for us, because it breaks us away from the material present that we live in. Anyway, I'm going to stop here, but I hope that you can see through this example that there are actually ways in which you can integrate the activity approach, credible approach, teaching learning cycle, and a modular sort of a conceptualization of where what you need to do within your own contexts.
Okay, for our last question. Okay, can we still demonstrate the recorded video as an asynchronous based on the procedural context that you've discussed earlier? Is it possible for them to teach grammar through procedural genre?
Absolutely. In fact, one of the things that I would suggest that participants here have a look at, let me just open it. Again, I didn't get a chance to go into this, but if you have a bit of time to look at it, it's a paper called Beyond Global Englishes, Teaching English as a Dynamic Language. So it's not, notice it's not teaching English as a second language or a foreign language, because when you talk about second language and foreign language, guess what? You're giving it an entity status, because it's an entity. Second language is an entity, foreign language is an entity, you're teaching an entity. Whereas when you look at a language as a dynamic system, then you're moving away from the traditional ways of limiting your understandings of language and then rethinking other things around it. So I would highly recommend that, have a look through this paper, because it actually goes into much more detail about these things and the implications of it across all aspects, curriculum writing, textbook development, material development, assessment, all of it. So have a look through this, and then again, if you have questions, we'll be happy to answer.
Okay, let me just read some comments from our participants. So one participant, okay, he said, I strongly agree that language is an action and not an entity. It's for communication, but not for complication. Another, such amazing presentation to Miss Mona and Dr. Mahboob. So this is great for them. So this is great. The technique is also practicing communicative language teaching. So for all the questions that has not been answered, feel free to reach Dr. Ahmar and Miss Mona in their email. So they will love to hear from you. So thank you very much. Now we would like to request all the participants to open their camera for our photo opportunity with our speakers.
I would also I would like to add something.
Yes.
When we are teaching using teaching learning cycle or the genre pedagogy, we call it genre pedagogy. We are not teaching them wrong grammar, huh? We are not like, okay, the student is but we are teaching them how grammar works in the context, and we are especially when we are doing joint construction. There we are correcting it, and we have to tell them why we are correcting it, why should it be like this. For example, if the student wrote there like she do not go to school, and then we will correct it should be she does not go to school. Why is it that that it should be does? because when we say do, then we are pertaining to an actor that is many, but she is only one. Then who is the actor of the do here? And then and you know, like we are showing it how it works in the text, in the whole text. So we are not just, oh, let's correct, because according to subject verb agreement, one subject, singular subject, singular verb. We are not teaching them rules, but we are teaching them what meaning will it gonna convey if you use this word in this particular text. And also, we have to be very wary of the context that we are teaching. Like, for example, we are teaching language in social media, you know. So if we are teaching language in social media, then we don't have to be very precise about she do not want to go to school, or if we, because you know there are some, for example, African Americans, and they have, you know, like double negatives, and we know that it's social media. So so we don't have to be very strict about that. And we see that, you know, we can actually see, or we can actually identify in their language their culture. Oh, this person comes from this culture, and this is how it means in their culture. So we are also teaching them, you know, like be accepting of other culture as well, and how language works in other cultures. Yeah, so yeah, so I hope that helps. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Mona.
So let's have the photo op.
So we will now proceed to the photo op. So we're requesting all the participants to open their camera. So let's have this opportunity to have pictures with our dear speakers.
Okay po, so wait. Oops. So 1, 2, 3. Next window.
How are we going to do it? Window by window.
Window
Yeah.
by window.
We only have 3 windows.
Yeah, okay. Good.
Okay. Okay, that's it. So thank you very much, Dr. Mahboob and Miss
Thank
Mona,
you, everybody. Thank you so much
for
again.
that very insightful lecture.
Thank you so much, everybody. Hope to see you around. Take care.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. We highly appreciate your participations. By the way, the certificates will be sent to you through your email. So after you answer the evaluation form, Sir Darren, the
We'll send you the
evaluation form.
e-certificate after you answer the evaluation form. We'll just